In the spirit of this season, all my channels are doing at least something for Halloween. A Comic a Day has all of October being Ash vs. Insert Franchise here, and ComicSins has BlackEyed Kids as the very first video for the new channel. Links on screen and in the description. So I figured in fairness, let's just do a top 5-ish list on my favorite horror-ish comic books. Why top 5-ish? Because I can never choose just 5. It's uniquely hard to make this list because horror comics are not the same as a horror movie or a horror video game, where while you do interact with a comic linearly, reading the story as it plays out, there really can't be the same amount of jump scares or the score can't tickle your spine. These are the best examples of the various forms of horror in comics, and all of them are ones you should read the first issue for during this fantastic time of year where we embrace the scary. So these are officially the top 5-ish comics to read for Halloween. As always, these are just the 5-ish that are my personal favorite right now, and may not be the best or even ones that count as horror. So let's get started. Number 5. Witches. Witches is a Scott Snyder comic that many people compare to Stephen King's writing, where the monsters are more plot devices to push the drama between the characters, and honestly that's a pretty apt comparison. It is a really good read. However, the real reason that this is probably so notable for other people is the same reason that it's actually really low on this list for me: the art style. Now, while the art style by Jock is not bad, it actually enhances the horror imagery fantastically well. But like with 30 Days of Night, or rather more so than 30 Days of Night, the script tries to really push a realism to make the family drama work, but the art actually counteracts that with its sketchy surrealism. Like I said, it's not necessarily bad. I mean, it did make it onto my list after all, and the top of pretty much everyone else's horror list for this year, so it's definitely a read. Fun fact, did you know? The new Blair Witch movie really seemed to have been inspired by this in a near copyright infringing way when it came to their witch design, and even a subplot about trees, but you'll see what I mean when and if you see the flick and read this comic. Number 4. Postal. Dear Mr. Archivist, this isn't a horror comic. Well, technically no, it's not. It's a thriller looking at the rural town of Eden, which is filled with criminals, a murder mystery, and this heavy atmosphere that there's definitely nothing right in this town, all through the eyes of a man with Asperger's. While this isn't horror in the fact that there's no fantastical monsters, it's unsettling in its own way. Now, the reason this makes it onto a horror list, or at least a Halloween read list, is because it's a hell of a book that is so David Lynchian in its execution, being very much Twin Peaks with the mentality of True Detective, might be the best way to say it. It's really hard to explain because you need to read this book to understand that sometimes horror isn't about how much blood is shown, or how twisted someone can act, but rather the secrets that humans can keep and hide, and I just gotta show so much love for this book. To be fair, this slot almost went to American Monster by Brian Azzarello, for dealing with a similar theme about the monstrous side of humanity, but honestly, the big reason that Postal beat this out was because Postal has a far more chilling air around it that makes it more of a psychological horror rather than American Monster. Plus, at this point, Azzarello has shown he's a master of being pretty gritty and hard-hitting, so it was less of a surprise when the main character does something unsettling. And there is totally other books that could fit into this category, but none really compare to Postal for me personally. And there's a massive Top Cow event happening soon enough revolving around the town of Eden that you don't want to miss. Plus, I think there might be a free preview on their website. Number 3. Grindhouse by Dark Horse Comics. Halloween, for a lot of people, isn't about what makes you afraid or unsettled or freaked out. Sometimes the best answer isn't going for the cerebral or the frightening. Sometimes it's Z-grade drive-in flicks that are mindless fun. What do I mean? Well, Volume 1 of this Alex DeCampi series has B-Vixens from Mars, a fantastic evil aliens creature feature filled with TNA, sex, and violence. It's all about the old-time 70s drive-in exploitation style films that, while not every one of these stories is specifically in the horror or scary genre, some set in space, some being just sex romps, but ultimately these stories are all about having fun and never being too serious, that expands some great things like Evil Santa, which is always fun, in Sleigh Ride, and just get these to have a spectacularly fun time. Okay then, if you want another comic series that is more horror-based because you're all needy and I just want to throw as many names possible as I can, Afterlife with Archie and Chilling Tales of Sabrina are a solid read. And surprisingly, in the fact that they take the Archie characters we somewhat know and love and soak Riverdale in just total visceral horror that works so well. As for the Chilling Tales of Sabrina, well, they take the fact that she's a witch and make that as horrific as it could very well be. I also have reviews for those two in first issues, where I didn't even realize that Chilling Tales of Sabrina was a retelling of Sabrina the Teenage Witch. I know, stupid in hindsight, but totally worth a read. Number 2. BlackEyed Kids. Written by the Eisner Award winner Joe Pruitt, BlackEyed Kids takes the urban legend of children with blacked out eyes and runs with it. But this isn't just a retelling of what the Daily Star throws on the front page. Pruitt takes the concept and uses it as a foundation for a solidly creepy family survival story. But what makes it one of the best and still ongoing is that it's not a horror comic that just tries to gross you out with gore. Though this book does get bloody. It's chilling and unsettling in a way that does stick with you. I did a review of the first issue for First Issues, and honestly, the praise I gave it then really has grown with each subsequent issue. The heavy tension is not only in the superb plotting, but Simon Kudransky's art and Guy Major's colors all just build up onto this world and survival story that isn't like The Walking Dead or Girls. And secretly, I even added the BlackEyed Kids urban legend into my own never-to-be-published comic script, solely on the grounds that I wanted to kind of make a reference to this. I know, I'm lame. Now, I know there's going to be some that don't feel it should be this high, or even on this list, but firstly, it's my list of favorites, and an ongoing horror series that can keep me coming back for more is very much a brilliant thing in my book. Secondly, I'm a father of 2 wonderful boys, and I've noticed that ever since they were born, one of my biggest fears is losing them. But in that fear, it adds something to the family dynamics of this book that makes it a relatable fear. Granted, I've also woken up to my 2-year-old son just standing over me in the middle of the night, the shade of his nightlight blacking out his eyes, so I already have that image in the back of my head while reading. Seriously, go and check this out if you haven't. Or if you want a more cohesive or thought-out, legitimate review, the annotation for my first issue's review on BlackEyed Kids is there on screen. Number 1. Hellblazer or The Sandman. That's right, I can't choose my number 1. On one hand, The Sandman is not a horror comic, but rather a fantastical look through the cosmology of the world in the eyes and heart of an anthropomorphic personification of dream and other metaphysical entities. But in doing so, there's truly horrific moments and terrifying storylines that really make it ride the line between a dark fantasy and heavy horror. But then there's Hellblazer, which is heavily cemented in horror, with the lead character torn apart mentally by the occult and the mad demigods he's had to face in his lifetime. John Constantine, yes, it rhymes with turpentine, is someone who has sacrificed his friends, done all the drugs, is in fact bisexual, and basically embodies the late 80s British indie invasion, and it's glorious. These two, regardless of horror or Halloween, hell, read both on Valentine's Day. They're so damn good and just so damn amazing that at least one of them would make it on a top 10 best comics ever list if I ever made one. So that's my list. Is it totally different than a lot of people's? Definitely. Are there more than 5? Technically yes, and some of these aren't even horror, but isn't that the greatness of this genre? Something can be fantasy and be creepy. Fallout 3, when roaming around the wastelands in the dead of night with only your Pip-Boy to light the way, can become horror. So while some of these may not be traditional horror, these are my favorite that you should totally check out for the Halloween season. And as always, stay golden, Inklings.